to our final project. Our question is empathy a sign of strength or weakness? We have to say our names.
I'm Peyton Moen.
I'm Mackenzie Tveit.
I'm Maddie Lee, Melissa Toller.
And Austin Wolf.
Excellent. All right. So, this question was originally proposed by Benet. Basically, we talked about how it's important to consider that a lot of times empathy can overall be considered a strength because your life is likely not as fulfilled without relationships that bring you to higher fulfillment, but it's also a weakness if you put yourself to the extent, put yourself first to the extent that's like bad for yourself. So those are some important things to consider when we discuss it. And I think Jack wanted us to think how empathy is different from morality, which we read about in the reading by Benet with the Huck Finn stuff. And that's also some of the controversies that it can be related to. We talked about controversies in politics, if your morality and your empathy are contradicting, what do you do and which one do you choose? So
Our first philosopher is Jonathan Bennett. We decided that this was a strength. We had a little quote that went along with it, and it goes, "I think, though, that we must admit that someone who acts in which ways conflict grossly with our morality may nevertheless have a morality of their own." We did this because it shows that you can see from other people's perspectives and still understand that there's other thoughts than just your own.
yeah, the Huck Finn article talked about how Huck Finn did the right thing because he overcame his morality using his empathy. So that's an example of when empathy and morality are conflicting, and obviously in that case it's good that he used empathy, and it was a strength in that case because he was treating Jim like a human, which is objectively the right thing to do. So I think that's a good example of why it's a strength. Okay. No. Sorry. Okay, so for Aristotle, we wanted to talk about how he thinks it's a strength, and my quote that I want to use is when he talks about to be friends, then they must be mutually recognized as bearing goodwill and wishing well to one another. So before he goes into friendship, in his article we read by him, he talked about how happiness is the ultimate goal, it's the end, and it's greater than just pleasure. And then he talked about how friendship kind of contributes to that happiness and that higher achievement in life. And then by talking about how they friends bear goodwill towards each other, that kind of is an example of empathy. So he's saying basically that you have to have empathy to have good friendships that are going to actually make you achieve the supreme happiness and the supreme good. So
Yeah, a quote that I found that goes along with that is, "For without friends, no one would choose to live." This kind of means that we need those connections, those conversations, and the empathy that comes from it, because without them, we just wouldn't be able to simply live, because there'd just be this conflict in our lives and we wouldn't really know what to do with it.
Does that have anything to add?
So the next philosopher is William James, and he was one of the founders of pragmatism and just values and ideas that are for practicality and usefulness. And we thought that for this question that overall he thinks empathy would be a weakness, and just based on the article and how he talked about the martial virtues and just the war and how we as people should take contempt for softness, obedience for command. That's kind of the opposite of emotion, empathy, and kind of what that shows. And then a quote that we found from him was, "Common sense and reason ought to find a way to reach agreement in every conflict of honest interest."
It almost seems like empathy would be something that would get in the way of making a common sense choice. It would be a distraction of some sort.
Yeah, I think he definitely wants people to think of things as a yes or no option with no gray area, just so for the offense of getting things done.
Yeah.
And even with martial virtues, it's hard to go into war. if you're empathetic to the people that you are fighting
Yeah.
against.
Complete
Yeah.
your task if you're empathetic towards the people that you're trying to
Yeah.
eradicate.
The whole point of this article is talking about like how to like make those martial virtues in people, and yeah, he doesn't like empathy can't be a part of that, and he doesn't want it to be a part of that. So definitely he says it's weakness.
We next talked about Kant. We decided that Kant saw it as a weakness. Quote that I found was duty does not rest on all feelings, impulses, inclinations, but solely on relation of rational beings to one another, a relation in which the will of a rational being must always be regarded as legislative. So kind of similar to the last, our emotions lead us wrong, go off what you know and not what you feel. Morality should come from what you know, not what you believe. And since you can never truly know what someone else is thinking or feeling, you can't base morality on that empathy.
Yeah, and he wanted you to like his goal was to find the objectively moral thing to do in all situations. And I think we can say pretty confidently that like empathy and emotions in general aren't objective. They're like super like person dependent, situation dependent. And so for him, it's a weakness to like rest your morality and like your logic on something that's like not consistent, and so like dependent on everything happening at once.
Very person to
Yeah.
person.
I think
Yeah.
it's too much of a spectrum, so he would just argue that like if you're saying that your emotions can contribute to the spectrum of your empathy, that you can't like make a decision because your decision would be based on
Yeah.
a spectrum that's not non-existent.
I feel like he's the kind of dude who would like if we go back to the Huck Finn example of where like Huck Finn, his morality said that he should like report Jim as like a runaway slave, but his empathy like allowed him to like save Jim basically. I feel like Kant would be like, oh yeah, that is the wrong thing to do. He should have gone with his morality, even though that's like, you know, obviously slavery is wrong. And like
Yeah.
we agree that it was good that he used empathy. It seems like Kant would be the kind of person that's like, oh, but that isn't the like right moral thing to do. So
Yeah.
And
in
even-
that case, yeah.
Even back then where it's like, that would be objective from person to person. So in his mind, that was the right thing to do, but
Yeah.
for a slave owner, you should have absolutely turned somebody in.
Yeah.
He also can't focus a lot on law
Yeah.
and about following the law and focusing on what the law says
Yeah.
is right.
I
'Cause
think
he
he
was-
believed in like the social construction of everything a lot more than he believed in like the, oh, we should have a
The
conversation about it.
individual, yeah.
It's just like, oh, whatever the mass believes is
Yeah,
what we're gonna do.
Because he was the one that was like, oh, everything you do should be able to be made a universal law.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Which like you could see that as like empathy because like you want it to be universal and work for everyone, but I agree with Maddie. It's like very much like not about feeling out the situation. It's just
like,
about like
this is what it is.
what's always right, no matter what kind of thing. So. All right. So our next one is Mill, and he is the utilitarian. So he basically just follows the greatest happiness principle, which is the idea that you want to act in order to like maximize the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. So we were talking about how it seems like he would think that empathy is a strength because he wants you to like base your decisions off of how the consequences are going to affect others. And so in order to like consider the outcome of whatever action you're considering, you're thinking about how other people would like view it and be affected by it. And like, that's obviously using empathy because you're thinking like from the point of view of another person. So I don't know. I think that when you look at the consequences, it almost has to be empathetic because you have to look at other people's point of view. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that he honestly is one of the ones who would argue the most for empathy being a strength,
Yeah.
being able to put yourself in somebody else's shoes and make decisions based on how their perspective would make you feel.
I think it's interesting that he uses like you need to find the thing that will make the people the most happiest, and that you can't like he literally says multiple times you cannot achieve that unless you work together.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's just like not possible.
I think that was the week too in the podcast where they talked about like different levels of happiness. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
like you would rather there's some happinesses are bigger than other happinesses, and like that's what you want to go for, and that's what he would want to go for.
Mhm.
And yeah, you just like have to, even if you're like, he would argue that like if you're doing something against your own best interest, but it is good for everyone else, that you should still do that thing.
Yeah.
because it's the best for everything. And so like, again, it's not even about how you feel, it's about how everyone else feels. So.
Yeah, I always think of like the train example too, like if there's a train coming towards you and there's a train coming towards a group of like 6 people on the other side, you should let it hit you before
Yeah.
you let it hit 6 people.
Yeah.
Like always putting others before yourself.
Mhm.
All right, so the next person we had was Lever, and we think that she would see it as a strength. The quote that we picked out was, because the justification for police powers in a democratic society requires the police to protect the liberty as well as the equality and bodily integrity of all people, regardless of their skin color or morphology. So we think it's a strength because you need to understand how other people are discriminated against in order to understand that discrimination. So like we had an example of like Black people can't solve racism. And everyone has to help, and that women themselves can't stand up and like say, hey, stop being sexist. Like everybody has to collectively believe in that.
Mhm.
And then we talked a lot about how we could see her believing that you shouldn't be empathetic because women don't necessarily want empathy. They just want it to be treated like equals. So we all agreed that we could see a situation where she says, no, like you shouldn't be empathetic towards other people because women have had to be empathetic for so long. So we should just do what's right for us in order to gain equality.
Yeah, and ultimately, we kind of came to like a collective decision that you have to be empathetic, but only like to a certain point. So with like the racism, with feminism, you have to be empathetic in the fact that you can get them to the point that they are equal. But once you get to that point, then like you've done your job, and then you can carry on, kind of.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just argued that like you need to have the empathy to see other people's point of view so that you can like fight for the causes that, again, like Maddie said, like everyone has to solve these like societal problems. It's not going to be like one group of people. So even if it's not something that's affecting you, you have like, in order to solve the problems, we have to be able to like see other people's point of view.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, like nobody wants you to just sit and feel bad for them.
Yeah.
They want you to actually go out and make a difference.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think it's really easy from like the feminist philosophy standpoint to say like these people would probably see it as a strength because I think that women are viewed as empathetic a lot more than men are. And I think that women have over the like the amount of time that feminist philosophy has become a thing, have started to become more open to the idea that empathy is a feministic quality because it's not necessarily like a bad thing. It's a good thing to be able to take care of other people. It's just like not the only thing that women are good at.
Yeah.
Our next is Adam Smith. Adam Smith, yeah. Adam
Mhm.
Smith. We said that it's not a weakness, but it's also kind of not accurate. The quote that I found that goes with this is, as we have no immediate experience of what other men feel, we can form no ideas of the manner in which they are affected. So basically, because we have no actual like knowing of what people are going through, we can't formally say that this is how we should feel, this is how we should show our empathy, but at the same time take that with a grain of salt because you can just take context clues of kind of how the person's feeling. Like if they're crying, obviously you want to console them. So we just kind of said that it wasn't really a weakness. So it's more of a strength than it is a weakness, but it's
Yeah.
also just like you
It's
have
kind
to
of-
bury it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like I can try my best to understand how you feel in a situation, but with all of the different like things that people have gone through, you're never going to fully understand from that person's perspective. You can really just do your best.
Yeah.
But that's also like the whole idea of empathy is it's not necessarily like, oh, how exactly are you feeling? It's like, how would I feel if I was in your
Mhm.
shoes? And how
Yeah.
can I use that to like understand your point of view?
Mhm.
And we talked about how like with Adam Smith, he was the one where we were talking in lecture about how like there's no objective reality and all that exists is like the exact moment that you're in. So like in order to like live and not go crazy, you have to be able to like think about memories and think about like use your imagination to like connect this present moment with like the moment 2 seconds ago. And so like in that sense, you have to be able to like take in all the like social information and stuff around you, including like what other people are doing and thinking and saying. So I think, like Alyssa said, it's like you have to use it. It's just he does admit that like you're not necessarily going to be correct all the time about like
Yeah.
what other people are thinking.
As long as that like good intent is there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
I think that's
trying.
the most important thing is just knowing that like you can't always be right, but you know when you're wrong. So
Mhm.
that like empathy is you're doing the right thing, even if it's not like 100% there.
Mhm.
It's not the wrong thing to be empathetic.
Yeah. And also that was also the lecture where you, Jack, I don't know, talking about how like we like fundamentally want like connection, with like other people and we want to be like a part of a community and feel that, but like we are physically separate and we can like truly never know what other people are thinking. So like in that way, we have to, like we have the drive to like try to understand what other people think in order to make the connection that we like want. So
Okay, so next was Sartre, and we said it was a strength for him. The quote that we pulled was, "A man is nothing else than a series of undertaking that he and the sum, the organization, the ensemble of the relationships which make up these undertakings." So we talked a lot about the existentialism and the existence precedes essence. And we pulled another quote, or never mind, we didn't pull another quote. I lied. There was a story that was in Sartre's essay that talked about a son who was deciding if he should leave his mother behind to go join the French forces or stay and continue to take care of her. And then the quote we pulled for that was, "If I feel that I love my mother enough to sacrifice everything else for her, my desire for vengeance, for action, for adventure, then I'll stay with her. If on the contrary, I feel my love for my mother isn't enough, I'll leave." And I think that that's a really important quote to pull, because on one hand you're saying like, yeah, I really want to go do these other things, but my mom is my mom. And he kind of points out a lot that having to make that decision makes you stronger as a person. And having to like really look at the situation that you're in and say like, okay, put these other things aside. My mom has been taking care of me for my entire life. And I think that's like a decision that a lot of us have to make in real life too, is like, oh, do I go to college in another state or do I stay with my family that's been taking care of me for my entire life? And that's just like a hard decision to make. So I think we think he would see it as a strength.
and it like is just an example of like it isn't easy to always be like, oh, empathy is always going to get you in the right place. It's always going to like be the right decision. It's like not as easy as, oh, I'm just going to always try to be good to other people. That's like not realistic. There's going to be like the nuances.
Yeah.
So I guess that's like one.
Yeah, it definitely goes with like the objectivity of it, because at the end of the day, you could completely choose the wrong idea and end up kind of derailing your life, whether or not you go to fight in the military or stay with your mom. You'll never know which is the actual
right
thing to
decision.
do.
Yeah. I think it's again like that spectrum of like empathy it's not the wrong thing to do. So you can apply it in so many different ways that, especially with Sartre, it's like he kind of views it as just like you need to like make your decision and then you need to stick with that decision. And if your decision is to be empathetic, then you're making yourself a stronger person.
And like either way, because he was the guy who's like talking about like you choose what you do with your life. You're gonna dictate your own meaning to your life. And so like if that's his philosophy, and so he's talking about like if you're like applying that to the whole world, then you have to assume that like everybody else around you is applying that same thing. So he was the one who was saying like the quote here is, I can take freedom as my goal only if I take that take that as the goal of others as well. So basically like if I'm going to believe in this philosophy, I have to assume that everybody else is also going to be like putting their own meaning into their life. And if the goal in my life is freedom, I'm going to assume that's everyone else's goal in life, because we're like collectively trying to make a purpose for our life. And so I guess in that way, there's like the connection of like what other people are thinking.
Yeah.
I guess.
Okay. I just can't say her name, but
De Beauvoir?
De Beauvoir. He's definitely gonna laugh at that. This one we kind of struggled with a little bit. But the quote that I picked out was, "Woman is the negative to such a point that any determination is imputed to her as a limitation without reciprocity." So we looked at this as like, I would say that empathy is more of a feminine quality, and those feminine qualities are looked at as a weakness. But De Beauvoir is saying that like it may be looked at as a weakness by society, but it's not actually a weakness, I think was her whole point.
Yeah, it's really similar to Lover. And just like it's one of those things that's been viewed as like a problem for so long, is like, oh, these women are so emotional and they're so like set in their ways of like being upset about something. And men always kind of viewed that, and society as a whole kind of viewed that as like problematic. Where now in the moderner society, it's become a little bit more accepted, and it's honestly, I think it's strength. I would agree with her.
Yeah, I would agree also.
I think also like I feel like the empathy, you can see it like in connection with like the idea of like being a motherly figure and like caring about your kids above all else. And obviously I think that that's pretty much accepted as like a strength of women, especially like maybe even to a fault because of the whole like stereotypes of like, oh, women should be the mothers and they should be
Mhm.
home taking care of the kids. So like that like stereotype, even though it's like not fair to put women in the box of like that's what they should only be, the stereotype itself like shows that they are empathetic and that it is like a beautiful, amazing thing for them to have like so much care
Yeah.
for other human beings. So
I think one thing with like all of the feminist philosophers that we talk about is just like the idea that like women are traditionally that way. And that if you like uplift a woman, she will uplift everyone around her, regardless of like their circumstances, their background, like how they got into their position. Like that woman, once you empower her, will empower others. And like typically, like in society, men are viewed as more like, oh, you're gonna help me? Okay, I'm gonna go do this thing for you, but it's actually gonna be like for my personal gain.
Like, I'm getting called out right now.
Figures, it's like, okay, well, you uplift a man and you give him this position in the military and he goes off and he fights the war. Like, yeah, you won the war, but like hundreds of thousands of people could die in the process. Where women, it's like we hear all these stories of like these great women leaders who will like stand up in front of the giant army and say no, and then march into battle. Like we even talked about like some of the instances where like women will like literally give birth and then go fight in things, or like it's just crazy. And I think that it's with all of the feminist philosophers, again, it's just like you uplift that one woman and she will encourage everybody around her. And that's why empathy has become a strength for them, not just because like, oh, we don't want to be viewed as weak. Like it's always been a strength. People just don't talk about it.
Mhm.
All right, so moving on to Fry.
Now that I put Austin on blast.
So we believe that it was a strength, a quote that we took from the articles, that people cannot be persuaded of things they're not ready to be persuaded of. So kind of this is basically just like example of like understanding what other people are doing and how just like if people aren't ready, they can't. I'm trying to word this.
it's a little bit of a stretch. We
It's-
can admit. 'Cause
yeah,
it's like,
This was another one that we kind of struggled with.
It's one of those ones where it's like, yeah, it's easy to say that you think it's a strength because you want to believe that a figure that talks so much about women's philosophy would say that women being empathetic or even men being empathetic is generally strong.
Mhm.
But then on the other hand, like a lot of her writing does point out like, oh, women are traditionally viewed as like the other person. Like they're not necessarily like valued as much as men are. I know we talked about that a lot in class and like the examples of like Jack talking about your daughter and like how people would say like, oh, that's so unfortunate that you're having a girl. And it's like, want to say that Fry's one of those people that would be like, yeah, she would think that's wrong, but also like her view and empathy could be completely different because she
Yeah.
doesn't want women to be empathetic. She wants them to stand up for themselves.
There's
I
like
mean-
the flip sides to it where it's
Yeah.
yeah, like women have been empathetic for so long, so like they need to shut it down, but also like they need to be like receive it themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think we picked this quote because we were like, oh, this like if you're like showing enough awareness to understand that like not everyone is going to be like convinced of even the most like logical of arguments, that's not necessarily a fault in your argument. It could just be like a complete block on their part and like a complete unwillingness to like accept any new information. And so
Yeah.
like in that way, having that like awareness about other people's mindset is like, I guess that
It's-
was like where
it's
our
kind of-
connection to
It's
empathy
kind of
lies,
showing
like,
empathy if you can put yourself in their shoes. and
yeah,
Even in the most illogical situations.
yeah, even if the
Yeah.
extent of the other being in the other shoes is like, okay, I know they're not gonna care
Yeah.
or like want to hear this out.
So we struggled with one. We thought it would be funny to put Austin on it. But
Nailed it.
Our next one is Riley Cooper. We kind of said that it was neither because she's the one who talks about having all these different boxes and how at the end you just shouldn't have any boxes for gender at all. So in this, we were kind of led to believe that you should simply treat everybody the same regardless of their gender and have empathy in the idea that a person's gender isn't all that they are. So just kind of really a neither situation.
Yeah, because she like obviously if you're like fighting for the rights of people who are being like constantly oppressed and like discriminated against, that's like empathy, because even if you're not in like a category that's being oppressed and you're still trying to help them, you're like trying, to help them, even though it's not necessarily your demographic, it's going to help. But at the same time, like her whole argument of like, oh, the boxes suck because they require like comparison. That's like the whole reason that we should logically get rid of them. So in that way, it's kind of like well, screw that, screw all the like everything happening in between. You should just like live your life and do whatever you want to do. And yeah, that was like where we were kind of in between, I guess.
Yeah, she didn't give like a specific answer, another one that we kind of struggled with.
So for Buber, we believe that it's a strength, and then kind of just, he talks about the I you and the I it, and how like, in terms of like relationships to form like that deeper connection with an I you, like you need that empathy, and like you can use the empathy to grow the relationship compared to an I it. So if that's like an I it relationship, empathy would be a weakness because you are like not close, you're not trying to form or build that deeper connection.
Yeah.
Who had the Giving Tree story and wanted to
Yeah,
connect that?
I can talk a little bit about it. Yeah, so in that conversation, especially in the podcast where it referred to the Giving Tree story where, you know, they cut down the tree farther and farther until there's nothing left. So with that, we kind of think that Buber would say you can, exactly like how we talked about at the beginning, you can only give so much before it's too far and you're just running yourself at that point.
You're good.
Simon?
All right. So last person was Weisenthal. So we said that he would think it's a strength. So the quote that I pulled was, I looked at the old lady who was clearly kind-hearted, a good mother and a good wife. Without doubt, she must often have shown sympathy for the oppressed, but the happiness of her own family was paramount importance to her. So the reason I picked this specific quote was because I think he's saying, like, if you replace word with sympathy with empathy, it's like pretty much the same thing. And so he's basically saying that like she did care about the Jewish people that were being slaughtered at these camps, but that like her own selfishness and like wanting her family to be happy kind of like overtook her empathy for the other people. And a lot of the book is he think like past this quote, he thinks that was weak of her. Like that's why he didn't tell her that her son was a monster, was because he knew that it would destroy her and it would destroy her image of her family and of herself and as a mother and a wife. So he saw that she didn't care for her empathy as much as he cared for his empathy, and chose to like hide that from her. So I think it's like also a lot of it is just the strength to like go through all the stuff that Jewish people unfortunately had to deal with, and still have empathy for that Nazi soldier. And like Simon did show empathy just in a way that wasn't like concrete. It was like he didn't tell the Nazi soldier like, oh, burn in hell. Like he just didn't say anything. And he still went to go visit the mother and still made the choice to like kind of immerse himself in like the life of that soldier and see what it was actually like from his perspective, even though a lot of the Nazi soldiers were not willing to see what it's like from a Jewish perspective.
And it only talked to his mom and just called him out. So all the things that he did.
Yeah.
Just chose not to in the end because of empathy.
Yeah, I think the fact even that it like tormented him so much to the point where he was thinking about it for the rest of his life, went to go visit the mom, wrote a book about it. Like you can tell that like even though he didn't outwardly, like Maddie said, be like burn in hell to the Nazi soldier, as I think most of us would probably do, he like wasn't outwardly mean, and like clearly he's like understanding where the soldier is coming from. I know I am not strong enough to have that same level of understanding. So I think it like he clearly has that empathy, and that he sees that as a strength, that he is able to, the fact that he's still able to be empathetic towards someone who is putting him through what he's going through is like crazy. And I think that you could even argue that like I think he sees empathy as a strength, but I think you, like anyone else, could look at him and see his empathy being a weakness to him. Does that make sense?
Like his other friends in the book, kind of like Arthur and the other two men that lived with him, were kind of like on his ass about it, because they'd say like, how could you care about this man that's doing all these terrible things to these people? Like you're weak for that.
Well, and again, like the fact that it tormented him his whole life, even though like it shouldn't have, probably, like he didn't do anything wrong. Like this Nazi was like messing up his entire life. Like that should not be on your conscience. So like I think you could argue that like his empathy was a weakness for him, but he sees it as a strength.
Yeah,
I think
I
that
would
was like
agree.
a character building thing. Like
And-
it's powerful, and it allowed him to like kind of live the rest of his life under the premise of like, I didn't forgive this person, but I also didn't ruin the rest of their life, because he knew that the Nazi soldier like already like knew that he had made a mistake and
Yeah,
just didn't want to make it any worse than
Yeah.
it was.
And I feel like you could objectively see him as like a good person. Like I know
Mhm.
he's the kind of person I like read about and I'm like, okay, he's a better person than me.
Yeah.
And he's like a bigger person. That's
Yeah.
like what I think of is like I think most people don't have the kind of like strength and like the goodwill to be like
Yeah.
that. And I think that like that just goes to show a lot about like how good his character is.
Yeah, and I
It's,
feel like
impressive.
what you said earlier about how like showing empathy, like you have a choice and like you build and like grow from those choices. And I feel
Mhm.
like Simon, by having that empathy and like
Yeah.
what he experienced, like him and he himself grew a lot
Yeah.
Yeah.
and made the decision and choices to
Yeah.
either tell his mother what he actually did, or like what he didn't.
yeah,
And I feel like his whole situation is like the biggest, it's like in the very beginning of the presentation where it's like, oh, what controversies are brought up by this question? This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
the controversy, like the whole idea of like, can you like have empathy for like someone who like
It's
a
a
Nazi
horrible
who's
person.
doing objectively terrible things? Can you like separate that person from like what they're doing?
Mhm.
Like that kind of thing. I don't know. I think the like I guess what I think of is like that can you separate art from the artist and that kind of thing. Like I
Yeah.
think that like his example, his whole thing is just a really good like
Yeah.
controversy of like empathy. I don't know. I feel like
Yeah,
it's
I would agree.
real well.
Yeah. Just one of you guys, we only have 6 minutes left before the 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay,
it's like
we're good.
going
We're on our
long.
last slide.
Okay. I can start this one. So the Am I My Brother's Keeper, the return to that. So the first reason that we talked about it, we said no, because you can't take care of yourself unless you take care, or can't take care of others unless you take care of yourself. So you have to prioritize yourself over others. If you're unwell, you like can't contribute to society, like in art or like in education or anything. Like if you're mentally unwell, you're kind of
Mhm.
struggling on your own. And then to the biggest point I kind of wanted to make with that was like, to be someone else's keeper is to expect someone to be your keeper as well.
Yeah.
So you have to make that decision on your own of like, if I'm going to give to someone, and you can't expect anybody to like reciprocate that like keeper energy towards
Mhm.
you. And you can give and never receive it. And so like you should prioritize yourself over like your brother in order to like self-preserve.
And that even connects with like what we were talking about with empathy. Like if you have too much empathy where you're like constantly giving and never think about yourself, like,
You'd be
that can be
problematic.
detrimental. And science person here, evolution, says like our basic animal drive is to like stay alive.
Mhm.
And like that is kind of selfish because it's like we don't care about anything else. All we're trying to do is like stay alive.
Survive,
And like
yeah.
that's still there within us. So like the fact that we're still alive shows that drive has like worked. So
Mhm.
you can't like forget about that, I guess.
Like one thing I think about this is like your body is like a tank of water. So like by like constantly like giving, like you're giving out, like you kind of need to receive that.
Yeah, you
Mhm.
need to replenish.
Because you can't, like once you're depleted, you're just
There's
in like a
nothing
terrible
else.
Yeah.
state of mind.
Okay, who had reason number 2?
I also had reason number 2, so I'll just do that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I also talked, so I did the no and I did the yes. And so my yes was because you can't grow as an individual without helping others. So I kind of referenced utilitarianism, John Stuart Mill saying, your actions are right in proportion as they tend to promote happiness, wrong as they tend to produce the reverse of happiness. So humans should care for each other in order to progress in society because like everything that is good and promotes happiness are typically things that benefit all the people that are involved. So if you're lifting up others and taking care of them when you're in need, that they will do the same for you. And we just talked about like that you can't expect everybody to have that keeper mentality. But with this one, it's like you can say that you need to take care of yourself because if you aren't well, you can't contribute to society. But on the other hand, if you're not contributing to like if you're not taking care of the people around you and you don't care about them, and you're not keeping them, they're just never going to reciprocate towards you anyways. So to like make the going in decision like, no, I'm not going to care about these people is the wrong decision to make. And you like people have to work together in order to benefit society. If everybody just kind of stayed in their own corners of the world, we would not have turned rocks into cell phones.
Yeah.
Like that's just that wouldn't have happened. So it's important to like, yeah, take care of the people that are around you because they may have ideas and things that you'll never have that you need to get from them in order to progress.
Yeah, that's kind of even I have reason number 3, saying that their relationships are most effective when there's an equal give and take ratio, kind of like what you were saying. Like if you're not also getting back, what you're giving, then you're gonna burn out.
Yeah.
For someone to have maintain a healthy relationship, you have to be able to keep, like, you keep them, they keep you.
Yeah.
Like, you take care of each other. And that's just like a really important balance for people to
Yeah.
find, but that's how you maintain those healthy relationships with other
Yeah.
people.
And that's like what is gonna bring your life to the next level too. It's not even a matter of like, oh, relationships are good. Like I think that you could have like the most amazing, like you could have your dream job, you could be living in your dream city, you could have the best, like you could have tons of money, but like I don't think anyone would say that their life is fulfilled if they didn't have like good people in their life.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like in whatever way, like that's what brings your life to like the next level of happiness, is like having the people to like share these good things with. And like in that way, it seems like, I don't know, it's hard to think of anyone who doesn't understand the like importance of like having good
And it's
relationships.
so simple. I mean, even the example he gave in class where it's like, you cook, I clean. Like, it's just the little things. That
Yeah.
you can keep
Yeah.
adding to your life. And people don't understand that even sometimes just those little things.
Yeah.
But, like,
Mhm.
can make people happy at the end of the day.
So we definitely took like the no, yes, maybe approach to this
Yeah.
question, but I think it obviously been like not feasible and not correct
It's
to
like,
like say no for every
yeah.
single one of them.
It's
Like,
like
yes,
yes
yes,
to an
it's just-
extent,
Yeah,
basically.
and I think everybody has different opinions on like how to answer this question, like morally, like even if we
Yeah.
didn't have to back it up with things that we've learned, like at the beginning of the semester, if we, like when you asked us, like, am I my brother's keeper? Immediately, like there were people, Peyton and I have been in the same group the whole time, Jackie's that. But there were people in our first group that were like, no. And then there were people in our first group that were like, what do you mean no? Like, obviously you're your brother's keeper. What are you speaking?
Yeah.
And it's really based on like how you were raised. Like if your family was
Mhm.
kind of like a every man for themselves type of family, you're not gonna care as much. But if
Yeah.
you grow up in like sports or you had a big family, you're gonna probably be more likely to say yes to this question.
Yeah.
So, and that's why we wanted to give like the middle answer too, is just like, as you get older, you realize that like people who say that a 50-50 relationship is like the best relationship that's wrong.
No.
Like
Yeah.
you have to have like 80-20 sometimes or 60-40, and
Yeah.
it's never gonna be half and half. It's people reciprocating and people taking care of each other.
I also think like respectfully, like we have lots of minutes. We gotta
Yeah, we gotta go.
Sucks, and the only thing that makes it good is the people. Like that's the
Yeah.
thing.